It is my great honor right now to introduce a gentleman that has done absolutely tremendous things for sustainability, for innovation, energy efficiency across buildings, industries, automotive, the sector, etc. Amory Lovins, I actually met about a decade ago myself as a younger person at the time, going to Schumacher College, where he imparted great wisdom upon me and really helped me catalyze my passion for what I wanted to do. So it's an honor to have you back, Amory, and to see you again. I'm not going to read his bio in full because it's quite extensive, but I do want to tell you that Amory's a physicist, an ex-Oxford Don honorary architect, Swedish Engineering Academia, and has written 500 papers and 31 books. Taught at 10 universities, redesigned numerous buildings, vehicles, and factories, and advised industry for 40 years in 50 countries. So I look forward to your talk, and I'm going to pass it over. Amy's going to talk for about 20 minutes, and then we'll open it to questions. Thanks.
Thank you. Very good to be here. How many of you are feeling down about the state of the world? Well, Joanna Macy said that hope is not something you have, it's something you do. So in that spirit, I'd like to talk to you about applied hope. There was an early pioneer, Bill McClarney, who was stirring a vat of algae in his Costa Rica research center when a brassy North American lady strode in. What, she demanded, are you doing stirring a vat of green goo when what really matters in the world is love? So he thought about that a bit and said, well, there's theoretical love, and there's applied love. And he kept on stirring. So many of us here stir and strive in a spirit I will call applied hope. We are working to make the world better, not from some airy theoretical hope, but from the pragmatic and grounded conviction that starting with hope and acting out of hope can cultivate a different kind of world worth being hopeful about, reinforcing itself in a virtuous spiral. So applied hope is not about some vague, far-off future, but it's expressed and created moment by moment through our choices. Francis Moore Lepay said that hope is a stance, not an assessment. But applied hope is not mere glandular optimism. The optimist treats the future as fate, not choice, and thus fails to take responsibility for making the world we want. Applied hope, though, is a deliberate choice of heart and head. David Orr says the optimist has his feet up on the desk and a satisfied smirk knowing the deck is stacked. The person living in hope has her sleeves rolled up and is fighting hard to change or beat the odds. Optimism can easily mask cowardice. Applied hope requires fearlessness. And of course, fear of specific and avoidable dangers does have evolutionary value. Nobody has ancestors who were not mindful of saber-toothed tigers. But pervasive dread, occasionally promoted by those who want to keep us pickled in fear, is numbing and demotivating. Sometimes when I give a talk like the one I'll give on reinventing fire, 1630 tomorrow, rather hopeful talk, somebody will get up in the question period and detail the many bad things happening in the world and all the suffering in the universe, ask, how dare I propose solutions? Isn't resistance futile? The only response I found is to ask as gently as I can, well, I can see how you feel that way. Does it make you more effective? I was teaching a college class a few years ago, and one young woman bemoaned so many global problems that she said she'd lost all hope and couldn't imagine bringing a child into the world. But discussion quickly revealed to both of us that she hadn't lost hope at all. She knew exactly where she'd left it. I think the most solid foundation for feeling better about the future is to improve it, tangibly, durably, reproducibly, and scalably. So now is the time to be practitioners, not theorists, to do synthesis, not specialization, to do solutions, not problems, to do transformation, not incrementalism. Or as my mentor Edwin Land used to say, don't undertake a project unless it is manifestly important and nearly impossible. We need, therefore, to shift our language and our action, as my wife Judy says, from somebody should to I will, to do real work on real projects and to go to scale. As that early activist, St. Francis of Assisi, said, preach the gospel at all times. If necessary, use words. In a world short of both hope and time, we need to practice Raymond Williams' truth that to be truly radical is to make hope possible, not despair convincing. Hope becomes possible, practical, even profitable, when advanced resource efficiency turns scarcity into plenitude. That's what I'll talk about at Globe tomorrow. David White has a nice poem called Loaves and Fishes that captures that goal thus. He wrote, "This is not the age of information. This is not the age of information. Forget the news and the radio and the blurred screen. This is the time of loaves and fishes. People are hungry, and one good word is bread for 1,000. So, with the world so finely balanced between fear and hope, with the outcome in suspense and a whiff of imminent shift in the air, we need to choose to add the small, stubborn ounces of our weight on the side of applied hope. As the Zen master Goto Roshi put it, infinite gratitude towards all things past, infinite service to all things present, infinite responsibility to all things future. That's a challenging mission. It requires you to combine sizzle in your brain, fire in your belly, perseverance rooted like a redwood, soul as light as a butterfly. According to the internet, one Michael C. Muhammad, whoever that is or was, said or wrote, "Everything works out right in the end. If things are not working right, it's not the end yet." Don't let it bother you. Relax and keep on going. So in that tranquil but unwavering spirit of applied hope, let me tell you a story. In the early 1950s, the Dayak people in Borneo had malaria. The World Health Organization had a solution. They would spray DDT all over, and they did. So the mosquitoes died, the malaria declined. So far, so good. But there were side effects. The roofs of people's houses started to fall down on their heads because the DDT had also killed tiny parasitic wasps which had previously controlled the thatch-eating caterpillars. Those then multiplied and munched up the roof thatching. So the colonial government addressed this problem by giving people sheet metal roofs, but then people were driven nuts by lack of sleep because of the noise of the tropical rain on the tin roofs at night. Meanwhile, the DDT-poisoned bugs were eaten by geckos, which were eaten by cats. The DDT built up in the food chain and killed the cats. Without the cats, the rats flourished and multiplied, and soon the World Health Organization was threatened with potential outbreaks of typhus and sylvatic plague, and had to call in the Royal Air Force from Singapore to conduct Operation Cat Drop and parachute a lot, by one account 14,000, a lot of live cats into Borneo. I'm not making this up. I couldn't make this up. And in fact, after I told this story on an American television program called 60 Minutes in 1986, after a week or so, CBS called up and said, "Did that really happen?" "Yes. I've got a lot of the literature on it in my files." And I said, "Well, somebody called us and complained it was an urban myth we were propagating. So we called the World Health Organization press office, and they said they never heard of it." I said, "Do me a favor, please. Call back WHO and ask them for the person who's been there longest." After a half hour, they called back rather sheepishly and said, "Not only did she say, 'That's exactly what we did,' but she said, 'You mean those fools have forgotten already?'" I wanted them to put it up on the wall in every office so we would remember this stupid thing we did, so we wouldn't do it again. So that was 86. It happened in the early 50s, so maybe 52 or so, I'm not sure. So that took him, 34 years or so to be within 6 months when she would retire of losing their institutional memory. There's an important lesson in that. And indeed, just last year, my friend Dr. Willie Smits did confirm this in the Collabat Highlands with the elders and how the cats came out of the sky. But we're still trying to trace it through the RAF archives, which unfortunately are organized not by operation name but by unit and date. So you have to read everything to find it, and we haven't found it yet. But I'm really curious about the logistics. Did they have little boxes that would spring open when they hit the treetops? Did they have armies of little old ladies knitting individual parachute harnesses? Did they just fly low and shove the cats out the door? Anyway, this is our guiding parable at Rocky Mountain Institute, the story of how not to parachute more cats. And what it shows is that if you don't understand how things are connected, quite often the cause of problems is solutions. And many of today's problems are like that. We created them by trying to do just one thing. But we can also harness hidden connections, so the cause of solutions is solutions. So we solve, or better still, avoid a problem in a way that solves or avoids a lot of other problems at the same time without making new ones. So we don't have to go parachuting more cats. So join me in envisaging where these linked multiplying solutions can lead if you apply and extend what you're learning and take responsibility for creating that world you want. Imagine a world a few short generations hence, very short because the first such cars came on the market in Germany last year, where spacious, peppy 1 or 2 liter per 100 kilometer cars whisper through revitalized cities and towns, convivial suburbs, and fertile, prosperous countryside, burning no oil and emitting pure drinking water or nothing at all, where sprawl is no longer mandated or subsidized, so stronger families eat better food on front porches, and kids free of obesity, diabetes, and asthma play in thriving neighborhoods, where new buildings and plugged-in parked cars produce enough surplus energy to power the now efficient old buildings, and where buildings make people healthier, happier, and more productive, creating delight when entered, serenity when occupied, and regret when departed. Imagine a world where oil and coal and nuclear energy have all been phased out, all vanquished by the competitors whose lower costs and risks have already enabled them to capture most of the world's market for new electrical services. Energy efficiency, distributed renewables, combined heat and power, a little bit of optional advanced biofuels that use no cropland and move carbon from air to tilth. Where resilient, right-sized energy systems make major failures impossible, not inevitable. Where the collapse of oil's demand and price has defunded enemies, undermined dictatorship and corruption, and doused the Mideast tinderbox. Where our advanced economy is no longer fueled at all by 19 cubic kilometers a year of the rotted remains of primeval swamp goo and dinosaur droppings. Where energy policy is no longer a gloomy multiple choice test. Do you prefer to die from A, climate change, B, oil wars, or C, nuclear holocaust? Or, if you're American, D, all of the above. We choose E, none of the above. Imagine, therefore, a world where carbon emissions have long been steadily declining at a handsome profit because saving fuel costs less than buying fuel, where global climate has stabilized and repair has begun, and where this planetary near-death experience has finally made antisocial and unacceptable the arrogance that let cleverness imperil the whole human prospect by outrunning wisdom. Imagine a world where the successful industries, rather than wasting 99.98% of their materials, follow the late Ray C. Anderson's lead. They take nothing, waste nothing, and do no harm, and do very well by doing good at the expense not of the earth but of less alert competitors. Where the cost of waste is driving unnatural capitalism extinct. Where service providers and their customers prosper by doing more and better with less for longer, so products become ever more efficient to make and to use, and we become so productive with energy and materials that we're doing almost everything with almost nothing. Where integrative engineering and biomimicry create abundance by design, and where elegant frugality turns scarcities and conflicts about energy, water, food, land, and minerals into enough for all, forever. Imagine a world where the war against the earth is over, where we've stopped treating soil like dirt, where forests are expanding, farms emulate natural ecosystems, rivers run clean, oceans are starting to recover, fish and wildlife are returning, and a stabilizing, radically resource-efficient human population needs ever less of the world's land and metabolism, leaving more for all the relatives who give us life. Imagine a world where we don't just know more, we also know better, where over-specialization and reductionism have gone from thrillingly fashionable to unaffordably foolish, where Darwin finally beat Descartes, where vision across boundaries triumphs simply because it works better and costs less. Imagine a world secure, free from fear of privation or attack, where conflict prevention is as normal as fire prevention, where conflicts not avoided are peacefully resolved through strengthened international laws, norms, and institutions, and where threatened aggression is reliably deterred or defeated by non-provocative defense that makes others feel and be more secure, not less. Where all people can be nourished, healthy, and educated, and where all know Dr. King's truth that peace is not the absence of war, it is the presence of justice. Imagine a world where reason, diversity, tolerance, and democracy are once more ascendant, where economic and religious fundamentalism are obsolete, where tyranny is odious, rare, failing, and dwindling, and where global consciousness has transcended fear to live and strive in hope, in applied hope. This is the astonishing world we're all gradually creating together. It's being built before our eyes by many of you and a myriad other world weavers. As Gifford and Libba Pinchot point out, brains are evenly distributed, one per person. So most of the world's brains are in the South, half are in the heads of women, most are in the heads of poor people. As an emerging global nervous system and millions of new civil society organizations start to knit together our collective intelligence, the most powerful thing we know in the universe, 7 billion minds wrapping around a problem, innovation and collaboration are starting to overcome stagnation and squabbles. The search for intelligent life on Earth continues, but as we all strive to become much higher primates, some promising specimens are turning up just in time, each of you here today. In their many ways, they, you, we, are mobilizing society's most potent forces. Businesses in mindful markets and citizens in vibrant civil society to do what is necessary at this pivotal moment, most important moment since we walked out of Africa, the moment when humanity has exactly enough time starting now. Each of you can choose. I think many of you, most of you, have chosen to be one of those unusual people who, with humor and courage, chutzpah and humility, eager enthusiasm and relentless patience, are composing their lives and combining their efforts to make it so. Here we are. And now imagine the power of all of us together to make it so. Thank you.
Thank you, Amory.
Sure.
Again, as articulate and beautifully spoken as I remember a decade ago, and you've been doing so for 4 decades at least, right? Maybe before I turn...
I'm 66, and my parents made it to 97, so maybe we'll do some more of this.
Good.
You'll just have to keep me young.
The beautiful speech you gave sinks into everybody, and they think of questions. Maybe I can ask you on a little more personal level. You've had an amazing career. You've had incredible influence. And if you were to look back when you started, when you were young like these folks out here, what things did you learn that you could impart or pass on to them to think about or to consider in their journey forward?
I had some wonderful mentors, people like Dave Brower, Edwin Land, my parents. But I think several lessons do stand out that I'll pass on. First is a great secret about education, which you've probably discovered, but in case not, I'll share it. There are few, if any, subjects that a smart and motivated person cannot learn as much about in 6 months as most, not all, but most people in the field know. So once you understand that, you can be utterly uninhibited in roaming around in everybody's turf, learning whatever you need and want to learn. After all, the boundaries are entirely imaginary and artificial. They're a product of academic tribalism. So, jump the fences, walk on the grass, go for it, and don't take any crap from the university administrators who want you to stick to a course of study. If your advisor looks at your course of study and says, I don't see what this has to do with that, you're probably on the right track. Like if you're mixing naval architecture with Chinese art history and cultural anthropology, that sounds pretty promising. And I think another important lesson is about how we deal with conflict, because you will encounter a lot, you may generate some. My colleague Clay Stranger, who's sitting in the back over there, is a practitioner of the Japanese martial art of Aikido, a way of blending energy, literally. And in Aikido, which is a vigorous but essentially nonviolent martial art, you don't fight with an opponent, you dance with a partner. If you were to come rushing at me to attack me, I could try to stay rigidly fixed in a position and hope you'll bounce off. But if I'm doing Aikido, I will turn around and face the way you're going and help you harmlessly past. And therefore, in the political analogy, again, you don't fight with an opponent, you dance with a partner. You honor others' belief systems as you would your own, even if you disagree with them. And you're committed to process, not outcome, in the belief that from a good process will emerge a better outcome than anyone had in mind in the first place. And then your responsibility is to make sure that whoever needs to take credit for the outcome will do so, whether they deserve it or not. We've found this extremely effective. And those of you who have some grounding in Asian traditions and philosophy will find most valuable in this regard the Tao Te Ching, the wisest book I know, 81 verses you can read in an hour and work on for a number of lifetimes. And the best accessible version I know is by Stephen Mitchell. It's in a little pocket book you can conveniently carry with you. It's not an exact scholarly translation. If it were, you couldn't understand it, but it captures the spirit perfectly of how to go with the flow and subtly help events to unfold as they want to naturally, rather than trying to interfere and force an unnatural outcome. So I've always found this a very sound and effective approach. And whenever I come unstuck in trying to get something done, it's through a straightforward failure to follow this Wu Wei principle and observe the practice of Aikido politics. That's probably enough on that question.
So I'd like to open it up to the floor. Are there any questions at all? Down here. I'll get this.
So first of all, I'd like to say thank you. This is such an incredible honor that you're sharing your time with us here today.
For me too.
And I actually work in the electricity industry, so I've got an electricity-related question. So there's a number of trends that are emerging and challenges that the industry is facing with aging infrastructure, limited resources for O&M, integration of new technologies and how we're kind of navigating that field, but also a huge exodus of the labor force. A lot of people that are retiring and a lot of young engineers who are coming in. So I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on these new engineers or these new employees with large existing utilities. What sorts of things could they be doing now and in the future as they sort of move up the ranks to start to kind of shift and develop a culture of sustainability and this, more notions of partnerships with smaller companies and more distributed energy initiatives, and so people kind of trying to make change from within large electrical utilities.
Wow. Well, this is our biggest and in many ways our most critically important industry. It is undergoing the most profound disruptive change of any sector, probably since the Industrial Revolution. And you'll find a good deal on that in Chapter 5 of Reinventing Fire. And some very useful papers, all open sourced, of our eLab, Electricity Innovation Laboratory. If you go to rmi.org, then the Electricity tab, then the eLab, under what we do, you'll find descriptions of a lot of the work streams and links to the products. Now, the cultural change is going to be wrenching. I could go on a long while about how that comes about, but fundamentally, the business model is broken. It's going to stay broken. It's going to get more broken, and we need a new one for several reasons. One is that most of the electricity we use is wasted. Customers are gradually figuring out they should buy fewer electrons and use them more productively. The only question about that is who's going to sell them the efficiency, and it's a good idea to sell customers what they want before someone else does. This may mean going back to Thomas Edison's correct business model. In the 1880s, after he invented the light bulb in 1879, New York Edison Company did not sell kilowatt hours, it sold lighting services. He charged you a penny to run a light bulb for an hour. And as electric motors came in, replacing the hydraulic utilities that used to run the lifts, the company said to Edison, well, shouldn't we sell kilowatt hours and then we can use them for motors in the daytime and lights at night? He said, no, you fools. Look, as an inventor, I know we're going to invent much more efficient lamps than this carbonized bamboo filament thing I cooked up. And when that happens, if we are selling lighting services, our cost of providing that service will go down and we'll make more money. But if we sell kilowatt hours, we will sell fewer of them, and it's the light bulb makers who will capture that profit. Don't be on the wrong side of the table. Well, they overruled him in 1892. We've been making the same mistake ever since, except his business model still survives in street lighting, which is on a service basis. But now the service model of selling customers the hot showers and cold beer they want, not the means of getting it, are, of course, flourishing in France as chauffage. Most commercial building heat is sold as a service, not a commodity, by chauffagistes. And we can have froidagistes, illuminagistes, rotagistes, and so on. And those are starting to emerge, and it puts you and the customer on the same side of the table. And then the other big disruption is that the central thermal or hydro power plants on which we built the system are no longer economic to build more of, and in fact the thermal ones are no longer economic to run. South of the border, we're shutting down well-running nuclear plants because their operating cost alone can no longer compete with the wholesale price, driven down not just by gas but especially by wind power. And new wind and solar power in the U.S. now sell for less than the levelized cost of a new combined cycle gas plant. So in that sort of world, let's see, how does the incumbent utility respond to the insurgents? Well, ostrich is not a good model. Deer in the headlights is not a good model. Trying to block or tax the competitors is not a good model. In fact, it annoys the customers so much they just leave. And it's already economic to do that in some places like Hawaii. RMI just put out a paper on the economics of grid defection, and that grid parity of modern renewables is going to roll across the continent well within the lifetime of existing utility assets. But there are more intelligent ways to respond. The incumbent can buy the insurgents and sell their offerings as its own branded product. It can finance their and other competing products and have the same big cash flow as now, probably a fatter bottom line, but not own so many assets in the usual way, and they won't be centralized. Or you could be an integrator of technically qualified offerings. There are several other co-opetition models you can use, but we actually have assembled 40-odd industry leaders in the E-Lab where incumbents and insurgents have a safe place to talk and create mutual value rather than lobbing grenades in public, and where they're figuring out the next industry, new business and revenue and regulatory models, grid integration, grid security, all the hard stuff. And one of the more exciting things coming out of that now is a value tariff where the utility and customers pay each other the fair value of the services they exchange. Unlike net metering, that scales without breaking. So that may be a longer answer than you wanted, but I highlight it because it's an example of a larger phenomenon where legacy energy industries that have served us well and built our whole society and economic base now face profound technological and market change that they're ill-equipped to handle. So it is up to both innovators of the grizzled variety and of the up-and-coming variety to figure out something completely different that will keep the lights on and provide better service at lower cost and make more money at less risk. I think all of that is feasible, but as Edwin Land said, in order to have a new idea, you have to stop having an old idea. That's the hard part.
Another question? Here.
Thanks for your talk. One of the things I found most inspiring about your talk and just your career is how you're able to integrate so many different, knowledge of so many different subjects together and really combine it in a way that gives a whole, holistic picture of the world. And as you mentioned, one of your pieces of advice to us is to really look outside our specific discipline and kind of learn as much as we can about different subjects. So I guess my question is, in your career, how have you made those decisions to learn about which subjects to tackle next, or if that's a conscious decision or if it's just something that happens? I'd be curious to hear how that works.
Well, let's see. I did a lot of physical science in high school and after. I actually did the undergraduate physics in high school and math. And I also had a parallel track that went chronologically: music, classics, math, linguistics, some law, a little medicine, a lot of mountain photography. And I then started to diversify because in our line of work you need to pick up a couple of new disciplines a year and you never know what they're going to be. And after you do that for 30 or 40 years, everything reminds you of something. So your path will be different, and everybody's should be different in the room. We have too many problems created by narrow specialists and not enough solutions created by uninhibited synthesists. So along the way, I dropped out of Harvard halfway through because they wanted me to specialize. And I said, well, why can't I study what I want? It's isn't this a university? And it's my time and my money, both of which are scarce resources. And they said, well, 80-90% of the time, if we let people study what they want, it doesn't turn out well, so we have to protect you from your exuberantly transdisciplinary impulses. This was not very customer-friendly, so I dropped out and transferred to Oxford as a graduate student because I'd heard they wouldn't breathe down my neck so much. And indeed, that part worked fine, but then after a couple of years there, I accidentally became a don, and then I wanted to do a doctorate in energy policy, and this was 2 years before the Arab oil embargo. It was in 71, and they said, energy? What's that? It's not an academic subject, is it? We haven't a chair in it. Pick a real subject. So I said, well, I'm sorry, but as you will soon find out, I think it's going to become very important, and I think I need to go do it anyway, so I'll just resign the fellowship and go do that. So now all my degrees are honorary. I haven't an earned degree after high school. And I've now taught in 10 universities, but only subjects I've never studied, so I can have beginner's mind, and that's much more fun. So, yeah, if you're uninhibited and don't worry about whether you're following a conventional course of study, you can actually do something original and useful. Maybe you can anyway, but it's harder.
Another question? Any over here? No? Another one? Yeah, back here.
I've noticed a lot about how pretty much this room is filled with younger people that are aspiring to be, I guess, involved professionally and filling in the shoes of these people that will be retiring. And my question for you is, would you be willing to offer some pointers on communication that would help out this group of people to get to the places they'd like to be?
Yeah, let me interpret that in a little broader way. How many of you try to communicate with others about the climate problem? And what sorts of reactions do you get from people who don't think there is a climate problem? Yeah, and that's not as many Canadians as Americans, but I mean, start with the Prime Minister. You do have some. So I was having this conversation a week or two ago with a former very senior American government official who asked, how should we do our messaging about climate? And my answer was, don't do your messaging about climate. Follow Saul Alinsky's advice, the great community organizer. Talk to folks where they're at, not where you're at. Remember about honoring others' beliefs as you would your own? Well, there are a lot of reasons why you might want to do energy efficiency and renewables and sound farm and forest practices, the elements of a climate solution. Maybe it's because you worry about climate, but that's not the only reason. Other good reasons would include profits, jobs, competitive advantage, strong communities, national and local security, local decision-making, public health, creation care, environmental stewardship. There are a bunch of others, but that's a pretty good list. Now, if you like any one or more of those outcomes, you could support the needed energy, etc. transition without needing to like every outcome and without needing to agree about which outcome is most important. So if you focus on outcomes, not motives, and restrain yourself from an urge to inflict your motive, your truth on other people who may not share it, just go for the outcomes, you can get to yes quite easily. There's a wonderful film by Peter Byck, B-Y-C-K, called Carbon Nation, which is shown all over the American South in the evangelical churches. And it's about climate action, and it's for climate skeptics, but it doesn't make them wrong. It's not disrespectful to them. It speaks to their concerns in their language, so they get it and they like it. Peter and I were having a conversation about Aikido politics recently. I asked, how do you interact with climate skeptics? He said, oh, well, typically I'll say that it's fair up front for them to know where I'm coming from, that I think climate change is a big problem, we're causing most of it, we need to fix it. And then the magic words are, he says, and what do you think? They're not used to being asked that. And they might say something like, well, I think climate change is a hoax and Al Gore is a fraud and the scientists are making this all up to feather their own nest and it's a liberal plot to bring in communism or whatever. And Peter says, well, I don't think you'll be able to convince me of that point of view, and would it be fair to assume I probably can't convince you of my point of view either? Yep. So he says, well, let's see what we might agree about. What do you think about wind power? Oh, it's terrific. Rancher down the road from me is making a lot more money on that than he ever did on cattle. How about solar power? Oh, it's great. Do more. Stick it to the Arabs. How about energy efficiency? Oh, that's a no-brainer. And he gets, 95% agreement on all the issues that matter about energy without ever having to talk about climate. So I hope that's useful advice, and it's not just about climate, but about a lot of other issues that each of you care about. Find out what the person you're talking to cares about and talk about that. And you'll find a way to weave in your message in a way that addresses their concerns, and that's going to be a lot more persuasive than trying to get them to share your motive. Okay?
One final question here. I think there's one back there, or just there.
I see there's a lady here as well.
Or where? Oh, sorry, Christine. We've got.
Maybe we can do both, and I'll be briefer.
Okay, sure. Right there behind you.
I've read a few of your articles, which are fantastic, and I was wondering if you could comment on some of the economic drivers to natural resource management that you've mentioned previously.
Can you be a little more explicit?
Looking at how companies manage resources and I guess the business case for that.
Well, in the broad sense, the extractive companies, is that where you're going? Or
Yeah. I mean, energy usage but extractive companies, sure.
Being efficient in your own internal use of resources in a company or a household or a country is just common sense. But I've been thinking a lot lately as a member of the National Petroleum Council, see, I'm getting painfully respectable, about the future of the oil industry, which I worked in for 40 years, and I'm quite worried about its state of health and its prospects, because it has in many ways built our civilization. It has remarkable skills and assets and capabilities. I've consulted for a good many of those companies, including in the oil patch in Calgary. And I'm concerned that the fundamentals of that industry are really quite discouraging. I mean, just think about it. Decadal lead times, extreme and exploding capital intensity, very high geological, political, and technical risks, being pushed into ever higher risk provinces and plays by the national owners of the resources who've already taken 94% of them and could tax or take away the other 6% at any time. And then that resulting risk-reward profile conflicts with what the investors want, which is more reward and less risk. A price taker in a volatile market, most of your assets can't even be burned. They're an asset bubble. You know, what a recipe for headaches. Why would you want to be in a business like that? It's like airlines. It's a great industry and a bad business. So how could you adapt to thrive in the new world that's coming at you? And of course, oil companies think about drilling holes, so they think, gee, we could do geothermal wells, or we could stick CO2 in holes in the ground. Well, all true, but I think if you think of them rather as large banks, very large cash flows with hydrocarbons attached, they could probably do very well financing efficiency and renewables using their wholesale and retail relationships. I recently gave a talk to the American Association of Petroleum Geologists, starting off with where my wildcatters had been active lately. They just found 18 million barrels a day at $18 a barrel drilling in the Detroit Formation, and 1.6 million barrels a day in the Seattle Formation, and so on. And as I went down the list, the geologists gradually realized I was talking about negabarrels, saved oil. And then the obvious conclusion is, well, if you go to the ends of the earth to drill for very expensive hydrocarbons that might not even be there, and somebody else found all that cheap oil under Detroit, wouldn't you be embarrassed and maybe broke? Shouldn't we drill the most prospective place first? And they got that, and they rather liked the idea. And in fact, we have helped some of our oil company partners figure out how to finance efficiency and make more money at less risk than they would do on exploration and production. Another nice thing to know about hydrocarbons is that in general, the hydrogen in them is worth more without the carbon than with the carbon, even if nobody pays you to keep carbon out of the air. And the reason is you can use hydrogen so much more efficiently than hydrocarbon that you'll make more money taking hydrogen out in a reformer than sticking it in a refinery. So even with coal, you know, where the highest and best use of coal, aside from holding up the ground, is to take hydrogen out of steam. It's really good at that, and you can sequester the carbon pretty easily if you do that. Well, we've got several large coal companies to start revisioning their asset base through the lens of the hydrogen value chain. So even if you think of yourself as being in the hydrocarbon business, there are some very interesting ways forward there. But I think our governments often get in the way, yours and mine, by putting a lot more effort into protecting the old energy industries than growing the new ones. And that's not a service to either kind of industry. I think we'll look back on this from the perspective of the incumbent energy industries and say, boy, were we on the wrong track? How could the supposed strategists and vision holders of our society have let us get into this mess without encouraging us to do something quite different? And there was one here, which I really will be brief. Sorry.
Thanks. Okay. I'll promise to make this brief. So this is just in relation to the previous question you had over there. Sorry, just lost my train of thought. Okay, yeah. So being a student from southwestern Ontario, I often find that there's a lot of apathy when it comes to environment, climate change, and these issues that are relevant to everybody. So how do you recommend we reach out to the masses and get them involved with this movement?
By not talking about climate, but talking about locally relevant issues. Real simple. That's what I was telling this gentleman. You can get exactly the same results by finding reasons that energy efficiency or renewables will be attractive to the people you're talking to. You don't need to mention climate. If they care about climate, you can talk about it. If not, that's okay too. Any reason will do. Outcomes, not motives.
Well, Emery, with that, I want to thank you. I want to give you a token of our appreciation. It's a bottle of local wine.
Wonderful, thank you.
That I hope you enjoy. And we also want to make you an honorary delegate and an ambassador of Leading Change. So thank you very much for coming. Thank you very much. Wow. Inspired? Good? All right, we're going to go to our next session now, the mentoring session. So how it's going to work is we're going to have 3 rounds, basically, 20 minutes each. On the back of your card, your name tag, there's a table and a room number. So the room 1200 to 1500 is this room. Okay. Room 2300 is right above us, and 2800, I believe, is just across the foyer over there. As we talked about, and you've heard sorry? All the mentors are coming in. Okay, great. Yeah. So we'll give them a round of applause before we start. I also want to introduce, there's the room lead, so Elizabeth Waterworth. Liz, so you want to stand up? Amy Moreau and Melissa Creed at the back. Okay, so they'll be in the room to facilitate the process and move people along. Basically, you'll sit at the table and the mentors will move, so it won't be as chaotic. As we talked about, mentorship is a great opportunity for you, and I think you've heard that from a number of speakers about the value that brings and the encouragement you got to reach out to mentors. So this is an opportunity, if none of you have ever done it, to engage these people. They won't bite, I promise. I know all of them, and they've had amazing careers and done amazing things. And talk to them. Ask them any question. And I hope the mentors will impart on you not only the successes but the failures, because we often learn much more from the failures. So your 25 mentors are across. Let's give them a round of applause first. And if I can ask you over the next 5 minutes, up, stretch, go to your room, take a bio break, and then be back in 5 minutes or so.